So my name is Yves. I'm the new regional manager of Bpifrance, the French public investment bank in Eastern and Southern Africa with Ramzi.
Morning, everyone. My name is Ramzi Ojami, and I'm the export development advisor working with Yves in Nairobi since September last year.
So I think after this morning's panel, it's safe to recognize that co-industrialization is a key driver of societal change, of competitiveness, of economic growth. Actually, we believe that there's huge potential in Eastern Africa to build partnerships for industrialization projects. In Kenya only, the industry sectors account for 80% of the GDP. There are strong incentives to further develop this sector, as His Excellency the PS of Industry mentioned this morning, for instance, the Special Economic Zone program, which is building in Kenya. Yet, this economic potential seems to be untapped. And to realize this potential, realizing this potential requires innovative financing, requires strategic leadership, strategic partnerships, requires regulatory environment as well. In the end, it all comes down to leadership, and that was mentioned this morning during the introductory panel. So our distinguished panel will explore those challenges and opportunities in mobilizing investment, discussing successful case studies, and highlighting best practices that can pave the way to better support business ties in between French and East African companies, French and East African companies in the industry sector. And to do this, I am most happy to welcome Frank MWITTI, who is with us, who is the CEO of Nairobi Securities Exchange and used to be the Eastern Africa market leader at EY. Thank you so much, Frank, for being with us. Amyn MUSSA. Amyn, your partner and the head of projects and infrastructure department at ALN Kenya, Anjarwalla, and Khanna. And you also co-head the firm's real estate and construction department. You specialize in energy, projects, infrastructure, natural and renewable resources, as well as real estate and privatization. Thank you so much for being with us. Othmane CHAOUI, that I'm sure most of you know. You're the president of the French Chamber of Commerce to Kenya. You are also an entrepreneur in the industry sector with your company, Imani Energy. And of course, Vincent Apt, you are the food security advisor at the French Treasury Department. You have also an in-depth knowledge of the Kenyan and East African agro-business ecosystem, as you were based for many years at the French embassy over there. So to start, I would like to start with a general question, yet a difficult question that I will address to Frank. Frank, according to you, what would be the current trends in industrialization in East Africa? What will be the current trends in investments for industrialization in East Africa?
Thanks, Yves, and I'm glad to be here. Hopefully by next year, I'll be talking in French. But for now, I think the only thing I can say is bonjour. So to your point, Yves, I think the first thing is to appreciate how far we've come, both as Kenya and as the East African region, as far as industrialization is concerned. A lot of these economies, including my own in Kenya, are primarily agricultural based. And in many ways, that has meant that the opportunities that have presented themselves a lot of times are traced back to the agricultural sector. Having said that, what most countries have been doing, in my own included, has been for governments specifically to define their industrialization policies, and with that, of course, be very clear on the sectors they intend to prioritize and the routes for foreign investors and the private sector to participate in the industrialization push. Specifically for Kenya, there's a vision in Kenya, it's called Vision 2030, which the government has defined as the mark for the country becoming a medium or rather middle income economy. And the specific route for achieving Vision 2030 is specifically anchored in industrialization. And specifically, the government has identified 3 pillars. The first one is what you're calling the low industrialization space. And that specifically points to things like labor-intensive sectors like agriculture and textiles and the leather industry. So the government has specifically been pushing for those sectors to be given preferential treatment to enable the large population of youth and other people to be able to come into those sectors, and they are also making it much, much easier for foreign investors to invest in agriculture, in textile, in leather, given that they are labor intensive and easier to get going. The second category is the medium to high value sectors. These relate to sectors, for example, like pharmaceutical, manufacturing, value addition, agro-processing, and all that. And the last one is the high value one, the advanced one. That would be things like biotechnology, but that's a long shot. I think the key thing to note is that the government is actually looking to get investments into sectors that support industrialization policy. They are looking at investments in energy, in value addition, as I've said, in manufacturing, and of course in the support services like healthcare and education. We can talk a bit more in the panel on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Frank, for this overview of the industrialization landscape and also how the environment can be improved to attract FDIs in this domain. Maybe Othmane, please go ahead.
I'll just do a question, Othmane. As French Kenyan, even I would say Kenyan French at this point, what are the main challenges when conducting industrial projects in Eastern Africa? And what innovative solutions can you address for such issues?
Thanks for your question. Let me just maybe preach for my parish before, as we say in France. We basically at the French Chamber of Commerce are involved in a dialogue that we've held with the ministry under the guidance of His Excellency Juma Mouhwana and his other colleagues, principal secretaries. We are basically collecting the information on the issues and problems that the French companies have been facing, but not only, we're also the voice of the European countries. And within that dialogue with other private sector representatives, we've tried to come up with a list so that the government could tackle those issues. So when it comes to the industrialization and the industry problems, maybe before looking at the challenges, let me just state some of the facts that we need to have in mind. The GDP of the country is $114 billion, a growth of 5%, inflation of 6.6%. However, Kenya is the entry point for the landlocked countries. Uganda, South Sudan, even a bit of Somalia, and northern eastern Congo, from Goma to the Ituri. It's the engine of the region, so you can't look at East Africa without having a presence in Kenya, and that's most of the French and European companies have done so far. It's a diversified and resilient economy. So with all those key and positive notes, yes, we do have some deficiencies, and one of them is on the infrastructure. There was a railway that has been created, the SGR from Mombasa to Naivasha. There's a plan from the government now to extend it to Uganda in order to continue and tap into those landlocked countries. However, if you look at it from a pragmatic perspective, the roads are still a bit problematic. And in fact, those issues are leading to higher logistic costs. So, and a few issues as well on the energy grids that are going to be looked into. So the solution for that, obviously, I think, considering the state of the exchequer these days, PPP, So there is a push for PPP. For instance, there is a need for transmission lines. There is two projects that are being looked at by the government. There was a road, but we won't talk about it. Number two, one of the issues that has been identified, the second one is high energy costs. Of course, I think it's normal. We see it in many geographies whereby a high energy cost is a hinder to the development of the industry. So obviously that has been emphasized by many actors. We're looking at investment in renewable energy. Solar, there's a lot of companies that are looking at solar in the CNI space, the commercial industrialization. I'm also involved in it nowadays. I'm originally a wholesaler of petroleum products, but I'm looking at that green transition, and that's something that we're looking at. With the right financing, you're looking at a payback in 3 to 5 years and producing your own electricity. So we're talking with L'Oréal, for instance, on the same. A third one, a labor skills gap. So if you look at Kenya, its skills force in terms of C executives and support functions, finance, we have a really educated workforce. And 90% of the companies, our French companies, have either a CFO or a CEO that is Kenyan or even both. Here, when it comes now to the labor skills, the labor gap, there's an issue with the skills on the labor gap. So the government has started to do vocational centers, TVETs. I know Schneider Electric has just started one on the same. I think that's one of the gaps that we need to look into. And obviously, it comes with industries. So French companies that are willing to invest in Kenya and maybe set up a manufacturing sector, please, yes, take advantage of the EPA. There is a European partnership agreement that has been taking place, reducing the tariff for imports and exports. So I think that's a real opportunity to seize now. And I think that is it with the three challenges that we've seen, but obviously there are others. But at the French Chamber, we are here with the Team France Export at Large and BPI to support you. So whenever you want to come into the country, please don't hesitate.
Thank you. Othmane, you mentioned something very interesting. You mentioned the PPPs that obviously many companies are looking at in Kenya. And I will address my next question to Amyn, who is an expert of the PPPs. PPPs combine public resources with private sector efficiency. They encourage long-term investments. With PPPs, you can share the risk. According to you, Amyn, what strategies could be implemented to foster precisely PPPs in Kenya and in the region?
Sure, thank you for that, Yves. So PPPs have started gaining traction in Eastern Africa and across Africa, by and large, because there is a significant funding gap for infrastructure, whether it's energy, roads, rail, as has been mentioned. And so in order to be able to create the right climate for PPPs, my view is that you need to have a waterfall of structures and issues put together. You need to start with policy, followed by laws, followed by the right contractual structure, and lastly, followed by an enabling environment. So what do I mean by these things? When it comes to policy, I think it's fundamental for government to decide upfront so that investors and financiers can understand how do we want to finance our infrastructure. There are fundamentally three choices. You can use a standard EPC structure where the government funds the infrastructure cost through its budget, pays a contractor to build the infrastructure. We have seen a further version of that through what we call an EPCF structure, where again the government gets a contractor to build an infrastructure, but pays over a period of time. The issue with those two structures is that the amount payable falls on the government balance sheet. It's a debt due and payable by government. So I think government needs to make policy decisions around where do they want to use their budgetary support for. And to the extent they want to look at the third category, which is PPPs, then I think it's critical for government to come out, have a public participation and say, for these sectors, government will be looking at PPPs. And to the extent the policy is well set, and we have seen examples of this, then you do not have the debate about whether, well, this port or this airport is a national treasure, it should not be subject to PPPs, or energy should not be subject to PPPs. The policy needs to be developed up front. So for example, in Kenya, in the energy sector and specifically in the generation sector, the government's policy over the last 15 years or so has been very clear. We're looking for private investment to come and build generation plants. We have seen investment in geothermal, we have seen investment in wind, in solar, because of that very clear policy. Another example of this is we acted for our sponsor client for the concessioning of the port of Dar es Salaam. The Tanzanian government was very clear that to improve efficiency and increase investment that does not come out from the Tanzanian government budget, the PPP model should be used for the port projects. And I think when you have that upfront clear policy, then from a public participation perspective, the public is clear that these things will go through PPPs. And so once you get the policy right, you then go down to the procurement laws and make sure there is very clear guidelines on how public procurement for PPPs is done.
Okay.
So whether it's single sourcing or tenders, and there is an advantage to both, provided it is well structured. And then you go down to the right contractual structures and the enabling an environment. I think if you tick those four boxes, we can create significant growth in infrastructure financing across Africa.
Thank you so much, Amyn. Thank you. I think from what you said, in the end, it all comes down to how do we create the conditions of better partnerships between French companies and their counterparts in East Africa. So PPPs are obviously part of the answer. But then it all comes down also to what's, in which sector you need to prioritize to create the conditions of better partnerships. So I would like to ask my next question to Vincent, and he knows why. Because there's one sector where French economic know-how is quite competitive. It's the agro-business and the agro-industry. And there's also a sector in Kenya, East Africa, and Africa at large, where there are needs for better partnerships. So my question is very simple. How can we unlock the potential for agro-business partnerships in Eastern Africa? How can the Team France, that you know very well, fund and better connect stakeholders both from France and Africa?
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here today. Two big questions, so I'll try to do my best to be concise and precise. But I was happy to notice, and not surprised, but happy to notice that so many other speakers were speaking about agriculture and agribusiness and so on, and I'm not surprised. Coming from this sector, I'm not surprised that this is a key question in Africa in terms of economic and value addition and employment and so on. After that, it's also important to realize, and that's why it's interesting where I stand now, to realize how specific is this sector. It's a live industry. It's an industry in the different territories working with so many people, so different from other industries. So we have to take this in consideration, thinking about partnership, but also thinking about finance and support, or PPP or something like this. Not the same definition. So to unlock, maybe to raise 4 points. I think one thing, and it has been said this morning, is to consider all agricultural value chains. We think about exports first, but local value chains contributing to our regional food security or food nutrition security are also very important in order to feed the growing population, and particularly, and it has been said also this morning, to feed the cities who are growing. And without this agro-industry, it's not possible to do this. So it's very important to have this global overview of the sectors, and everything is interlinked. When you progress, you bring innovation, it can benefit to different sectors. First. Second is to be collaborative. In this sector, if you are not collaborative, you won't do anything. That means that if you don't have a dialogue, permanent dialogue between different industries, between the suppliers and so on, the farmers, thousands of farmers for suppliers to identify what are the standards, what are the needs, how to supply the industries, it's important. And also, some sectors are very difficult. I take an example in Rwanda, where the Avril Foundation is involved in structuring the sector and developing the soybean production. It's very interesting, this production, because it can be for human nutrition, but it's also for feed, first of all, and to give feed to the poultry sector. But when you look at this, you need to have an oil industry, but in the meantime, you need to invest in the feed, in the cakes industry. And if you don't have both in similar time, you invest in both sectors, you won't have an optimum in terms of cost, in terms of availability of products in the sector. Third is to have a broad definition of what is an investment. So many times I discuss with people and say, bring investors, but what is the definition of an investor? Is it someone bringing money? Is it someone bringing innovation? Is it someone bringing knowledge, capacity building, or just expertise or experience sharing? And it's important to say that it's not one people or one company could provide everything. And in each situation, you don't need the same thing. So it's important to better understand what this, and that leads to me to the partnership consideration. So to see, okay, partnership is not only on finance, it's on everything that I've just discussed. And I think in Kenya, the French Chamber of Commerce is a very dynamic organization, also with a regional dimension and so on. And when I was there, we set up an agro club, bringing together French companies based in Kenya and also Kenyan companies. And I was surprised when we designed it, how important was this collaboration, and at least how many companies, 40, 50 French companies acting already in this sector in Kenya when we have a broad definition. And today, I guess, there is an farming of program in Kenya. The idea is to bring together, to exchange with innovative cluster in France and to identify promising enterprises. And so you connect this and you find a way to help the project growing and so on. One point on finance, because you asked me this question. So on finance, I think we are, because of the specificity of the sector, we are working now at the French Treasury, we are working with all the stakeholders. So for sure, the Team France actors, Bpifrance, Proparco, the IFD group, Treasury also is founding in different ministries also. So it's important to work together and to find synergies between the tools. Some are more dedicated to export, some are more dedicated to development, but we can combine to find the good way to provide loans, to provide equity, to provide guarantee, and to tackle some specific point, smaller tickets in this industry, but also smaller tickets in the farm, in the more, in the farming sector. That means sometimes it's just $100 you need in order to start a campaign. So it's very microfinance and so on. So on that, we mostly work with NGO, Proparco as project with this, or with banks, and equity is here, and as a good is a very important, strong partnership with the team France. So I think this is important, and now based in Paris, the idea is also to work with all the DFIs to share experience of how to exchange experience on specifically on this sector. What are the key issues, and can we tackle this? IFAD is providing new tools. World Bank is working on this, so this is what we are doing in a nutshell. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Vincent. I can see that we are running out of time. There's another panel just after, so I'm afraid that if we have some questions, we'll have to ask them directly just after this panel to our different panelists. I would like to thank them for their time, their insights on this thematic. There's huge potential in between France, East Africa, and Kenya. There are answers to tackle the untapped potential, one of them being the PPPs. And that's precisely what the next panel is all about. I can see the different panelists that are here, so I will invite them to move on the stage to tell us a little more about the financing options and the PPPs that we could consider. Thank you so much. I think they deserve a round of applause.